Hello, everybody. Welcome back. So, before we get into this, all the links I used for research will be down below, like always. There will also be a link to my other podcast, Sinister, in case you would like to check that out. But with that being said, today we're talking about the case of Patricia Marie Viola. And this one, we have a decent amount of information for the year that it all happened. I feel like these older cases, there's not really a whole lot, even in like the early 2000s. So we have a fairly decent amount of information, but we don't have a whole lot of photos, so I apologize. Um, but with that being said, we are talking about the case of Patricia Marie Viola today, and this one is just really sad. But I want to go ahead and get into this. So, 42-year-old Patricia was the kind of person who made every day special, especially on holidays. She would go all out, even for Valentine's Day, with presents and food, and she would show so much love to her husband, Jim, and their kids, Christine and Michael. Like, it even said, like, she would go all out for, like, even, like, the really, really minor holidays that a lot of people really didn't celebrate. Like, she just made it a whole thing. She just loved celebrating life. And she just loved taking care of her family, even her extended family. Patricia was a stay-at-home mom um, who lived with her family in the suburban town of Bogota, New Jersey. So Patricia and Jim met in 1982 on the day Jim went for an interview at Honeywell, where he still worked at when she disappeared. After the interview, he met her in the personnel office, and there was an immediate spark between them. They married in 1986 and quickly had their two children. So, at age 12, Pat was unfortunately diagnosed with epilepsy, and it was wildly controlled with meds, thankfully. But the November before she went missing, she experienced a rare grand mal seizure that left her unable to drive. At her doctor's recommendation, her driver's license was suspended for 3 months in November 2000 until at least February 2001. February 2001. 1 week before she disappeared, she would get the very sad news that her doctor was recommending another 3 months without her license, and this absolutely devastated her. She loved being able to go out and go shopping and find gifts for people. Like, she just, like, that was just something she looked forward to. And unfortunately, she was not able to go out and do this because it was also around the time when she was doing Christmas shopping, so that, like, really disappointed her. So, 2 days before Valentine's Day in 2001, it seemed like an ordinary day. She was up early and she followed her typical routine to get her family out of the door. Jim noticed that Patricia seemed a little bit down, but nothing too concerning. A couple things happened the day before that would explain her mood. So, the driver's license suspension that was being extended, I should say, I'm sorry, and her sister-in-law, Donna, had burned a hole in the bedspread. Smoking in the house was tolerated up to this point, but this was too much for Patricia, and Patricia decided she would confront Donna the next day. So Donna was living with them. I believe she was having some own turmoil in her life, and so Patricia and Jim, they graciously opened their home, and she had been living in, I want to say, their best basement guest room. And she had burned this hole, and Patricia just kind of like was at her wits end. But Patricia and Jim planned to do so after a party that night at the home of some friends. Um, I'm sorry if I pronounce her name wrong. Twanetta Faggio Markowitz and her husband. As soon as they got to the party, her friend knew something was really wrong with Patricia. She was clearly distraught. Antoinette pulled her aside, and Pat began to sob uncontrollably and said there was something she needed to talk about with her, but she kind of clammed up when pressed for details. And Patricia said that it was far too complicated in that moment to get into. She begged Toinette to cancel their upcoming vacation and asked her to, quote, take care of her kids no matter what, end quote. And Toinette did cancel. On February 13th, 2001, it seemed like a normal day. Jim was out of the house by 6:30 a.m. The kids were off to school by 8:15 as usual. Antoinette would call to talk about the night before, but Patricia just simply brushed it off and changed the subject. She noted that Patricia seemed in a hurry to get off the phone. After Patricia, stormed downstairs to confront her sister-in-law, and Jim would later say that this was out of character for her, as she was irate and screaming at her sister-in-law, which was not typical behavior. She was a very kind person. She tolerated a lot, and she was just a very gracious person, so her acting like this was just not typical. After seeing the family off that morning, she left the house at 8:38 a.m. and walked 2 blocks to her job at the library of Bixby Elementary School, where she was there for a couple hours and then left at 11:30 a.m. At 11:35 to 11:40 a.m., she was last seen by the crossing guard at Palisade Avenue, as well as the mailman to who she waved at as she walked home. She came home to a message on the answering machine that the security alarm had been tripped earlier. That morning, a security alarm company got a report of an alarm going off at their home, and in accordance with their protocol, they tried to call Pat, but they were unable to reach her. They then tried to call Jim, who was also unreachable, and then they successfully got a hold of Jim's mother, who called Pat to check on her, but got the answering machine. At the same time, the alarm triggered contact with Bogota PD, who performed a check-by, driving by the house, checking in the windows, and walking the perimeter of the property. They concluded that there had been no break-in and all looked normal, and they assumed that she just hadn't fully closed the front door when she left. And Patricia did listen to the messages and called her mother-in-law and told her that all was fine, so she did eventually get that message. But Patricia would leave the house again, and the control panel of the security alarm shows that she did a reset of the alarm at 1:11 p.m. So it's assumed she left between 1:11 p.m. and 4 p.m. When Jim came home at 4:30 p.m., the alarm was beeping, but Patricia was nowhere to be found. Her coat was missing, but not her purse, keys, ID, her phone, or even her epilepsy medicine. Those were all left behind, so all the important things were still at home. The family only set the alarm when they left or went to bed, so Jim knew that she wasn't there. He was concerned because she was due to take her medicine soon, and she never skipped her medicine. She was never late. A key that the family used to lock the back door was lying on the kitchen table instead of being inserted into the deadbolt as usual. Jim called everyone he could think of. He checked bus schedules, and at 11:50 p.m. he called Bogota PD to report her missing. The cops went door to door. They spoke with neighbors. They stopped buses along a main route in town. They checked taxi logs and car services in town. They called the Port Authority police to check the flight manifest at airports. There was no trace of her. On February 16th, they got a police dog to assist in the searches, and they broadened the investigation to aerial searches, but still, there was no trace. After 2 weeks, Jim and Toinette, they teamed up to do their own search. Toinette decided to check local drugstores and gift shops, and a clerk, after seeing a photo, remembered seeing her briefly. Jim looked at hospitals, but there was nothing. Police continued to look for her, and there were 2 initial theories of what could have happened, and the first one was that she left on her own, or the second one was foul play. After learning of the conversation at the party, they began to suspect suicide. They interrogated Jim, and they gave him a polygraph, which he did pass. Jim was eventually cleared, and on March 2001, they would receive a tip from a man in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, who claimed he saw Pat at a light but nothing came of it. The next tip would come in 2002 from a man who claimed he killed her and said he had her driver's license, but that turned out to be a hoax. The case would go cold after this, but Jim continued to keep her name alive. In 2011, a PI named Gary Miko found a website run by Jim for finding Patricia, and he offered to look at her case. He tracked down the mailman she'd waved at, and he told Gary about a triple homicide that occurred in 1997 on the same block as the Violas. The triple homicide briefly gave her case new life, but later it was found that she had no ties to the robbery/homicide. In 2008, Jim worked with Senator Loretta Weinberg and Governor John Corzine to pass Patricia's Law, a law that set new guidelines for police to follow in missing persons cases, including taking every missing persons report regardless of circumstance, offering family resources, and collecting DNA material and entering it into databases. In 2012, there would be in 2012, remains that had washed up in 2002 on Rockaway Beach uh, in Queens, New York, were finally ID'd. These remains were positively ID'd as being Patricia. The New York City Medical Examiner's Office linked the remains of a left foot to her via DNA analysis. A beachgoer had come across the skeletal remains in July 2002, along with a sock and a shoe. DNA samples that had been entered into databases, the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, and CODIS, yield a match from DNA given by her children. And Jim would have to break the news to his now grown children. But the mystery of where she went for the second time that day and what happened to her is still a mystery. As of 2019, the case is still considered open. Anybody with any information is urged to contact the Bergen County Sheriff's Office at 201-646-2222. Again, that phone number is 201-646-2222. So what do you guys think happened? I am leaning towards foul play or suicide. And I am leaning towards suicide because of the whole thing at the party. When she was crying uncontrollably to her friend, there was something just so wrong. And she made her friend promise to take care of her children no matter what. That just seems very ominous to me. I feel like most people wouldn't just make someone promise that, no matter how upset they are. I just feel like that's not something that most people do. And her just being so distraught over something that people are just like, what could have it been? Like, we know it could have been like the burn hole or the driver suspension, but are those two things enough to make her want to do this, commit suicide? Or is there something that we don't know about that maybe someone didn't say anything about? I don't know. It's just that conversation that kind of made me feel a little weird. And also, I kind of lean towards foul play just because she disappeared, didn't take anything important with her. That key wasn't in the deadbolt. The whole alarm thing. And I guess you could also associate that with just her also committing suicide, just leaving. I don't know. That's what I lean towards the most. But let me know what you guys think down below. What do you think happened? Do you think she met an unfortunate end with foul play, or do you think she committed suicide, or do you think it could have been an accident maybe? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will see you guys very soon. Bye, guys.